Hi, my name is Jillian Barr, and today I have the joy of sharing my thesis with you, Transcendent Beauty, Beholding God in Classical Music. A couple of the main sources that I used, at least in the beginning invention of this thesis, were The Divine Quest in Music by Robert Mendel and Only the Lover Sings by Joseph Piper. So I'll just dive right in. So 2 weeks ago, I gave this very thesis for my defense and presentation for my school. I had 73 people show up, and at the beginning, I asked them two simple yes or no questions. The first was this: could you name 20 music artists ranging from now to the last 60 years? The chat box started flooding with answers, and most of them said yes. There were one or two no's in there. The second question was this: could you name 20 classical music composers? Again, the chat box started flooding with answers, but this time I only saw one or two yeses in there, maybe three, with a couple of maybes. But majority said no to this question, while the majority say yes to the first question. It all continued to confirm my fear and the need for this thesis. Here's the problem. We don't know classical music, and we have little to no familiarity with the master composers. The proliferation of modern music has caused us to become so involved with the music written today that we've denied ourselves not only some of the most beautiful music ever written, but an opportunity to behold God. But before taking this further, let me clarify that I'm not here to say that we shouldn't listen to modern music. Rather, I'm here to say that we should listen to classical music. Classical music has a wonder and a beauty that modern music simply does not, a wonder and a beauty that we should not ignore or deny ourselves. So please listen as I argue that people of all ages must listen to classical music because of its transcendent quality shown through complex form and because of its sublime beauty. But first, I need to establish a historical and definitional context surrounding classical and modern music. Classical music is music written during the Common Practice period, or the 3 centuries roughly between 1600 and the early 1900s. For the purpose of my speech, the music written during this time is classical because it has two main characteristics. First, its forms. Now, classical music could be extended into the 1500s, where we see the beautiful choral music. But I say 1600s because it wasn't until the 1600s that acoustic instruments began to really develop. And this was when music as an art really broadened. With the advancements of instruments, musicians had the means to create complex melodies and harmonies, which allowed forms in music to begin to develop. Some examples of forms developed during this time were fugues, sonatas, capriccios, concertos, and symphonies, a couple of which I will soon return to. Each of these named styles have standards within their compositional form. For example, a sonata always pertains to a strict ABA form, while a capriccio will always demonstrate chromatics at its core. Form is key in defining classical music. The second characteristic is this: the intentionality behind classical music's composition. Classical composers compose music for beauty, understanding that their music reached beyond this material world to something greater. Beethoven believed that, quote, music is the mediator between the spiritual and the sensual life. It is the one incorporeal entrance into the higher world of knowledge, which comprehends mankind, which mankind cannot comprehend, end quote. Well, Gustav Holst, another master composer, explains that, quote, music, being identical with heaven, isn't a thing of momentary thrills or even hourly ones. It's a condition of eternity, end quote. Classical music was written with a known spiritual and beautiful quality. This is very important, so you should remember this. Entering the 20th century, music changed as its purpose shifted to that of industry and production. This is because digital sound and mixing allowed for musical creation apart from acoustic instruments. As a result, music became very easy to compose. A recent study shows that 1,000 new songs are uploaded to digital music sources every hour. Instead of focusing on composition, modern music focuses on what appeals to the populace. Today, industry propels modern music production, and beauty is defined by what will sell. Again, I'm not here to condemn modern music. I'm here to demonstrate that there are important differences between modern and classical music, and that we should explore classical music further. But first, I need to define beauty and the divine. Now, I know what is beauty is a question that philosophers and theologians have explored for a very long time. It's a question with many complexities and great depth. But as I do not have time to explore the depths of that question, I will use a working definition of beauty for my thesis. Specifically, I will refer to beauty in light of Thomas Aquinas' definition developed in his Summa Theologica. Beauty is anything which has wholeness, harmony, and radiance. Something beautiful will objectively contain all three elements. Finally, when referring to the divine, I will refer specifically to the triune God of the Bible. In this speech, I will argue that classical music has a transcendent quality and will explain how classical music's form establishes its beauty. I will not focus on broad societal, cultural, or educational efforts to bring classical music to prominence. Rather, I will demonstrate why people should learn to love and appreciate classical music and incorporate it in their daily lives. So let's dive in. Classical music has a transcendent quality. According to God's design, music and beauty have an inseparable relationship, and together they should reflect the divine. But before understanding how this applies to classical music, we have to understand the relationship. From his word, we know that our God sings. Zephaniah tells Jerusalem that God, quote, will exalt over you with loud singing, end quote. The Bible also refers frequently to the voice of God, which theologians and authors such as Dr. Peter Leithart or C.S. Lewis have interpreted as God being a singer. Since God sings, and God is the creator of all things, he is the creator of music. In addition to being the creator of music, God is beautiful. David writes in the Psalms that he desires to, quote, gaze upon the beauty of the Lord and to inquire in his temple, end quote. Not only is the Lord God himself beautiful, but he has made everything beautiful in its time according to Solomon. All beauty reflects God's beauty, so beautiful music reflects God. Following this argument, there is a relationship between music and beauty. When music is created beautifully, it is transcendent. It reflects the divine. In developing classical music's definition, I explained that the classical composers intentionally composed their music for beauty, knowing that this beauty reflected something greater. The beauty in classical music reaches beyond the material world to the divine, and this is classical music's transcendent quality. But up to this point, I've spoken fairly generally about classical music's beauty. So now I want to argue that classical music's beauty comes from complex form. To refresh ourselves, Aquinas says that beauty is anything which has wholeness, harmony, and radiance. To achieve this completeness, we need form. The essentiality of form comes from Genesis 1 and 2, when God created the world. He brought order from disorder and demonstrated beauty by bringing the elements of creation together in a specific way. He spoke, and the formless took form, and he called it good. God established that form creates beauty. A human made in God's image can also create beauty, bringing order from disorder through form. This is important because classical music emphasizes form and craftsmanship. The classical composers took rhythm, notes, meter, dynamics, and technique and brought them together in form. By themselves, these elements of music are nothing. In fact, if you put them together randomly and without form, they can be ugly. But if you put them together well and skillfully in form, they can be beautiful. Brahms writes, quote, without craftsmanship, inspiration is a mere reed shaken in the wind, end quote. Composing beautiful music takes skill and creativity. It takes craftsmanship, and it's not simple. But what God did in Genesis was not simple. In fact, God's creation reflects some of the most intricate complexities we know, complexities we will never fully understand. Classical music demonstrates similar complexities because it reflects God's form in Genesis and its beauty, God's beauty. But now, let me show you. I want to look at two classical music forms in hopes to demonstrate how form establishes beauty in music. Though I will say that this will not do any justice, as there are so many classical music forms which we should explore at some point, but this will at least give you a small snapshot since I don't have time to explain them all. First, a fugue. A fugue is a polyphonic piece of music. Polyphonic means that the piece has multiple different voices, and typically three. A fugue always has a main theme, which becomes the familiar melody of the piece. Working together, the voices develop this theme throughout the piece by building upon one another. Again, a fugue is multi-voiced and thematic. Second, the sonata. The sonata is a piece which has one voice, but employs complex variations of that voice throughout the entirety of the piece. Three sections comprise the sonata: the exposition, development, and the recapitulation. This is known as ABA form, where the exposition introduces the theme, the development develops the theme, and the recapitulation takes the same theme and plays it the same as the exposition, but in a different key. Again, we have theme, return to theme, or theme, development of theme, return to theme, A, B, A. Turning to Aquinas, I want to show you that both of these pieces have beauty and completeness. The fugue represents a wholeness through the voices. The three individual voices come together to create one voice. Similarly, the sonata's three distinct parts come together to create one piece, a whole. A fugue is harmonious by definition of harmony through the voices singing with each other. Again, the sonata's three parts create harmony by working together. And both the fugue and the sonata create a sense of radiance through their wholeness and harmony. What I mean is this: the wholeness and harmony of the piece are what make the notes work together so well. And because the notes play together so well, because they are whole and harmonious, they create their sense of radiance. In other words, the notes become glorious. They reflect the beauty and glory of our God. Again, these two examples are but a fraction of what is out there, but hopefully they give you a small idea of the complexities and the completenesses found in these forms. But why does any of this matter? Beauty, radiance, complexity, form, divine music. It all leads me to my last point, quick, though very important. In fact, the rest of my thesis doesn't matter without this point. Classical music can lead us into the worship of our God and allow us to stand in awe of his beauty. We consume music every single day, whether that be listening to it, playing it, perhaps even dancing to it. However, the modern world has taught us that this is all just for entertainment. I love how Robert Mendel, a music scholar, puts it, saying, quote, "The objection to the theory that music is and should be only entertainment is that it relegates the art to a place of relative unimportance. The music that we value most is not a mere embellishment of life, but a spiritual enrichment of it," end quote. If we only consume music to please and entertain ourselves, we miss God's higher purpose for music, to spiritually enrich us, the listeners, and glorify him through its beauty. Today, we do not think about the depth that music has, and we've lost sight of its value and what it can do in the human life. Classical music can help us redeem how we think about music because its focus on beauty gives us the means, and perhaps even the desire, to worship and glorify God. However, one might object, saying that all music has a spiritual and beautiful quality. After all, didn't I establish that God sings and created all music? Did I not also say that God is beautiful and creates everything beautifully? This would imply that all music, regardless of form or genre, has a spiritual and beautiful essence. It seems incorrect according to Scripture to elevate one form of music above another. And these arguments do have merit. God did create all music, so I'm not saying that we can't find beauty in modern music. However, varying forms result in varying degrees of beauty. Generally speaking, modern music's compositional form is simplistic, whereas, as I've established, classical music is complex. In complexity, we find greater wholeness, harmony, radiance, and thereby greater beauty. And this is true for other artistic disciplines. For example, the track Home in a Suburb shows beauty because it is quaint, functional, nicely decorated, and familiar. However, it is beautiful to a lesser degree when compared to a medieval church with stained glass windows, soaring spires, and flying buttresses. In the same way, classical music possesses a degree of beauty that differs from modern music, not because they differ in spiritual or beautiful essence, but because classical music form creates a beauty that reflects God's beauty to a greater degree. Though some also argue that The form of music does not establish its degree of beauty, but rather the ear of the listener. In his Of the Standard of Taste, David Hume explains that, quote, beauty is no quality in things themselves. It exists merely in the mind which contemplates them, and each mind perceives a different beauty, end quote. From this perspective, beauty concerns itself with personal taste. People cannot define beauty by objective terms because every human ear has differing appetites and standards for beauty in music. However, this presents a subjective perspective that is inconsistent with a biblical one. We do not decide what is beautiful because God established a standard of beauty in Genesis, which brings us back to form. God used form to create beauty, and in doing so, he showed us what is beautiful according to him. Because of this, we cannot subjectively decide what is beautiful for ourselves because God created objective beauty. In wrapping up, I want you to think about this. We have composed much music throughout history, but most music has passed away within a generation and is no longer part of our remembrance, like chaff on the winnowing floor or metal impurities in the fire. That which is of inferior quality perishes. But classical music is the choice grain, our finest gold. It's still with us. It's still beautiful. And it still reflects God. But we have to hear it. We have to choose to listen to it. So choose a composer. There's so many. Beethoven, Bach, Tchaikovsky, Debussy. Honestly, I think I could just go on forever. Listen to their works, though, and strain your ears to hear what's happening in the piece. Ask which pieces are more favorable and why. Choose another composer, and this time compare this composer to the first, discussing the similarities and differences between their music. Now, this process will seem difficult at first because our ears have become lazy, but it's so necessary. I've told you why you must listen to classical music, and I can't do anything more. In fact, I've tried to do the impossible. I've tried to demonstrate classical music's form and beauty through words alone. I have to stop, and you have to listen and discover. Regine Sibelius states, quote, music begins where the possibilities of language ends. Thank you for listening.